Okay, so it looks like we have a lot of you that have joined us. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today in what promises to be what I hope is an insightful and thought-provoking discussion on the intriguing intersection between artificial intelligence and its impact on cybersecurity. So welcome, I'm Sharon Henley, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at OutThink. And I'm excited to be your moderator today for this AI panel. So before we dive into the exciting conversation, let me just take a moment to set the stage and go over a few housekeeping items to ensure that our time together is smooth and enjoyable. So first of all, I'll provide a brief overview of what to expect during today's panel, and then I will introduce our esteemed panelists who will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. And then, of course, we'll get to the meat of it and why you're here, which is a dive into the heart of the discussion, exploring ways in which AI is shaping various industries and the challenges and opportunities it presents. And of course, this is with an eye on cybersecurity. Towards the end, we'll open up the floor for your questions. So feel free to jot down any and make sure that you just include them in the chat section here. I'll be monitoring that, and I'll be sure to interject the questions to our panelists so that they can answer them for you. And on that note, definitely, we're encouraging very much an interactive panel. So if you have questions or have thoughts, please prepare to share. We're more than happy to answer questions. And at the conclusion, I'll wrap up things. And just note that we are recording this. So if you have any objections, then obviously be aware of that. And we'll be happy to share the recording after the event. So with that being said, I'm happy to dive into the world of AI innovation and its transformative power. So right now I'm excited to introduce our panelists who definitely are the experts and at the forefront of these fascinating developments. So thank you again for being here, and let's make this a discussion to remember. So over to you, Ash.
Hi everyone, good to be here. I would just caveat saying I'm absolutely not an expert on this area. I don't think I know many except for the esteemed company I'm keeping on this panel today, but I definitely have a few sort of thoughts from the coalface in my role as CISO of Apex Group. So just a bit of background, Apex Group is one of the world's largest fund administration and asset management firms. We've got over $3 trillion in assets under administration. And we cover a variety of financial services from fund admin and management right through to blockchain digital banking. We have the European Depository Bank under our group as well, and many other facets of financial services. So it's quite diverse, and which means it's a pretty challenging landscape to navigate. We were also heavily involved in mergers and acquisitions. So Apex Group is really sort of archipelago of sort of 40 businesses brought together. Some very niche, bespoke businesses, some much larger. So again, got quite a diverse landscape, not only culturally in the business, but also from a technical perspective. So we're undergoing a huge transformation program at the moment to integrate everything under a global technology services wrapper. And my function is one of the key horizontal domains sitting at the heart of that transformation. And obviously, as the backdrop to this discussion today, we're sort of very much looking at where our loss exposure is today, what sort of things we're going to need to prepare for moving forward as a business, and the advent of J&I and the sort of risks that are associated with it, as well as the opportunities. Is really where, or really at least informing a lot of the cost-benefit trade analysis that I'm doing at the moment. So in terms of my information security function, so I sit as the global CISO. So again, horizontal coverage across the entirety of the group business. So as you can see, I look after everything from identity and privileged access through to all forms of security engineering and operations, risk management and controls, and all the assurance work as well. So again, quite a diverse set of capabilities that sit under my purview, and we're in I think 95 countries as a business, and as you can see, my information security function is dotted around all over the world, which is great because it's really valuable for insights and approaches. And I suppose the final really critical piece as well is that we're extremely heavily regulated. So being in all of those countries, I'm beholden to a lot of global regulators who have very specific views on some of the technical developments that, again, form the backdrop of our discussion today, which, again, from my seat, particularly politically, make it very challenging sometimes to demonstrate what we're doing as a business to address some of these challenges going forward. And I say challenges because I think my approach to risk management decision making is absolutely a trade-off between cost and benefit, and the advent of J&I technology is absolutely as much of a benefit as it is or has elements of concerns. So obviously, like most businesses today, we're going through the motions of defining policies, understanding how this technology is being used, particularly in business operations, those areas of the business, the client service operations, where I might have very limited visibility on a day-to-day basis on how people are using technologies like ChatGPT. As a fund administrator, a lot of our most critical assets are really the IP and the PII of our clients and businesses that we work with and investors that we work with. And I would say as well, it's probably one of the few sectors within financial services that's quite far behind the times in terms of technical development. So the advent of some of this new technology can make people run before they can before they can even crawl, really. And that excitement's great, as are the efficiency gains that can come from, gathering open source intelligence through some of these technologies. But we have a very real concern from an accidental sort of threat-led approach of users inputting information into these platforms, of which after we have no idea where that data goes and how it's manipulated and stored and utilized thereafter. And I would say there's definitely, at least in our business, a culture where that's not very well understood. The loss associated with that isn't very well understood. Now, a lot of the time it's probably pretty, it'll be very, very simplistic type of queries that people are entering in, probably things like Excel functions and other things like that to expedite their work. But there have been plenty of cases which we've observed where users are inputting more sensitive information. And particularly as a group business, we don't always have complete visibility of where all that data is. We also have, on the accidental front, a large number of third-party contractors that work with us. So again, visibility is a key issue where we don't know where those contractors might be using our data with some of these sort of J&I technologies outside of our business to either expedite their own work portfolio or to support operations in our business. And the sort of open source nature of that makes it very challenging from my perspective to mitigate. On the adversarial front, though, it's sort of a good and bad news story, really. So in that sort of technical arms race, we're seeing, we're a private business, we have a very public, or certainly some members of our exco are very public. So we've certainly seen the more advanced spear phishing, which is absolutely leveraging forms of AI technology to craft, particularly large language models, to craft very, very similar toned emails, phrasing, things like this, and message intent on behalf of various EXCO members to other individuals in the business to either execute transactions, to exfiltrate data, whatever it might be. And as a result, we invest very heavily in email security. Fund admin, because as I mentioned, it was technically quite far behind the times. One of our challenges is that a lot of our process transactions are conducted via email. So what we've done is really focused on sort of post-seg controls, where we've looked at machine learning capabilities that can help essentially train themselves on all the ways our internal users interact with other colleagues internally, but also with clients and investors externally, so that we can take preventative action in real time. on emails that are fraudulent and malicious, and that can be anything from auto quarantining through to just simple detection mechanisms. So for every advance in that space, I am seeing development in the sort of vendor market from a cybersecurity standpoint that help addressing some of those concerns. But we also have challenges also around things like data poisoning. Okay, so the biases that we see in the models that we might be using internally in the business, and they can lead to some instances of breaches where we see, or incidents that we see things like reputational damage come to the forefront. So for us as a business, competitive advantage loss and reputational damage is absolutely key. We're in a very competitive marketplace, and winning business advantage is very key to the business. So one of our concerns is the sort of generation of any misinformation or malinformation about the business, and the potential that can have on our impact as a reputation, as a brand. And so what we have seen as well is a lot of spoofing activity, which is clearly step changed in its sophistication only in the last 18 months. And it's clear that Gen AI is playing a role in that, in the data and telemetry people are able to gain on our business, that attackers are able to gain, and then to use beyond that. I would say for us at the moment as a business, that is where our chief concern is, and that we don't really, at the moment, I would say the sort of exploit implementation for the adversarial use of Gen AI technology is still very much in the illegal data extraction, social engineering and phishing space. I do think I have colleagues across the industry where they're seeing instances of things like, or very rudimentary instances of automated hacking and payload or malware generation. But at the moment, I think it'll be way too generic to cause any sort of significant impact to businesses. So I think it's really that ability to be able to expedite the reconnaissance and the weaponization work that attackers are doing through the most common threat vectors, right? Email, like I mentioned, is a key one. So that's just a brief overview of what our business looks like at the moment. Some of our concerns, or at least initial concerns on the horizon for Gen AI, but also where we think it can truly also yield operational efficiency. Most of our stuff still, as I said, run in sort of email and Excel. So functionality, automated functionality from some of these models that we can get through codes or algorithms that we're running can really help improve our business, as well as the concern that we have to try and mitigate the risk from it.
Thanks for that overview, Ash. So I guess on to the other side of the equation here, Donica, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Sharon. That was great. Lead off, Ash. I've got pages of questions for you already, but and I guess I encourage everyone to send your own questions in on the Q&A. Like Sharon said, we'd like this to be as interactive as possible, so send them in on the chat, and we'll look forward to answering them in a minute. I'm Donica Kirk. I'm the head of AI and data science at OutThink. And so, yeah, I'd just like to begin by talking about one angle where we're seeing generative AI being used in the cybersecurity space, and it's kind of, this wasn't pre-prepared, but it's exactly what Ash said at the end there, which is the primary vector that we're seeing being impacted right now is phishing, right? So, and I think the key insight, if I could get you to take away one thing, it's that there are a lot of new tools coming on board. There is, ChatGPT has safeguards built into it that ostensibly stop you building phishing emails from it. To be honest, it's relatively straightforward to find workarounds for those. But you don't even need to worry about that, because already there are jailbreaked versions, there are clones that are explicitly designed to create phishing emails. So Worm GPT, you can see on the screen here, is one. The other big one that's getting a lot of interest is called Poison GPT. And far from having any safeguards built into them, they'll actively work with you to build the most convincing phishing emails that they can. I think if there's one insight I'd like you to take away from this, though, it's that whatever cool new technologies the bad actors are using to create their phishing simulations, phishing communications, the output is the same as it always has been, right? Which is they're creating some kind of communication. It could be an email, instant message, could be a voicemail, a phone call, some combination of all of the above, that is using a social engineering technique to try to convince staff in your organization to reveal sensitive information that they should be keeping secure. Okay, so if that's the same, what are the differences that this new technology is bringing into the landscape? And to me, I think there's three or maybe 2.5 differences. The first big one is volume, right? It's just a lot easier to create phishing communications using these tools. So whether you're someone that was handcrafting, very artisanal, unique messages in the past, or you're already using quite a lot of automated tools to churn out quite generic messages, you're just got a huge multiplier by using these new tools. So if there was some amount of time that it took you to create a dozen messages in the past, you can now create thousands or even tens of thousands of messages for the same amount of effort. Secondly, the sophistication of all of these things is increased by the use of these tools. So if you take all of the threat actors you have at the minute and you put them in a ladder from most sophisticated at the top down to least sophisticated at the bottom, they all get to level up using these new tools. At the bottom, it could be something as simple as previously there was someone who was operating in something that wasn't their first language, they're making spelling, grammatical errors. Very easy to get rid of those using a large language model generative AI tool. If you were somewhere in the middle of the sophistication stack, maybe you're using quite straightforward social engineering techniques. Well, now you have access to the whole panoply of techniques out there because you can just ask these large language models, you make me an email that uses this kind of technique or that kind of technique to convince someone to hand over information that they have that I want. And if you're right at the top of the stack, you're someone that's making very handcrafted communications, maybe targeting, some of the most important people in the world. Well, now you can add deep fakes, you can add voice fakes, you can have back and forth conversations that are semi-automated for months or years with those individuals. So everyone improves their sophistication level. And then the final one, which is kind of related to that sophistication, is personalization, right? If you can scrape any information about your targets from the public internet, the dark web, wherever, it's now very easy to just drop that into your large language model or other generative AI prompt and seamlessly include that in the rest of your communication, text, video, audio, whatever it is. And what this adds up to at the organization level is a very different attack pattern to what you saw previously. The huge increases in volume, sophistication, and personalization mean that where previously you might have had to worry about your most sensitive team members being targeted, it could be your C-suite, it could be IT security. In a world like Ashes, it could be the people that have access to that PII of your customers. Now it's trivial for a bad actor to target your entire organization, right? It doesn't matter to them. They have the scale, they have the technology to do it, and they can do it regularly, right? So phishing is no longer a seldom seen event targeting the key parts of your organizational infrastructure. It's an every day of the week event targeting everyone in the organization. So the obvious question is, what do you do about it? How do you change the balance away from the attacker back towards your organization? I'd be interested to talk to Ash more. He was talking about the technological side of things, the arms race, and that's definitely true. There is going to be a battle between the good guys that sit in the background and protect your team without them even knowing about it, and the bad actors who are always trying to level up their capabilities. Personally, my opinion is we're not going to win purely on a technological basis, right? There was, when these new models like GPT 3.5 came out, there was a lot of talk of detection tools that could figure out from either just the basic fingerprint of the technology that if this was a machine generated piece of text or piece of video, or perhaps by explicit watermarking that the people that created the tools would actually include in the output, that would say, this is a machine generated piece of content, please disregard. I think we've got past that idea already. I think it's very obvious in the fact that OpenAI, the company behind GPT, they used to expose a detection tool as part of their suite of technologies on their website. They quietly retired that a few months ago because it was quite obvious that people were able to unlock these technologies by cloning or jailbreaking, and they were able to create things that certainly didn't have an explicit watermark. And to be honest, the technology is sophisticated enough, flexible enough that you can get around any signatures people are looking for. Certainly at that most sophisticated end of the phishing spectrum. So if technology isn't going to save us alone, what do we do? And I think to me, it comes back to that initial insight that whatever about the threat at the organizational level changing, at the individual user level, the thing that you're confronted with is the same as it was before, right? Which is a communication through some medium that is trying to elicit information from you. And so this is where I get to big up. This is my image of your organization being overwhelmed by the huge volume of attacks that you're now receiving. This is where I get to plug OutThink, though, because when the human is, in our opinion, the best line of defense that you have in your organization, I think that's still going to be true, right? If the technology can't save you, but the human is the one that is being impacted with the phishing communication, then they're the ones that you have to rely on to be part of a robust security culture that says every day you wake up and you're empowered to defend that organization by being alive to the threats that are out there and having the confidence and the training to identify them, report them, and avoid the downsides for the business. And that's exactly what OutThink tries to provide. Okay, so you have to trust in your team, and you have to give them the tools that they need to identify these malicious communications. And we think that's done by exposing them to simulated phishing communications that look like the real thing that they're going to meet, and crucially, not being negative or penalizing them if they fail for them. Right? This is a very dangerous business, and we expect people to fail as well as succeed. And what we try and do is meet people where they're at and give them highly personalized, tailored training that lets them know, look, these are the things that you did wrong last time. We're going to take you by the hand and slowly build up your confidence and your exposure to more and more sophisticated phishing attempts up to the point that you are that excellent line of defense that we hope all our employees and our organizations can be ultimately. And so to me, that is what we can do in this new world, right? And what's different from before is you've got to do that across the organization, right? You can't just focus on your most elite players anymore, whether that's the C-suite or the senior IT executives. You've got to be doing it to your lowliest sales executive or someone that works in your engineering division that's just come online and it's their first month, right? They're just as likely to be a target in this new world as your senior executive that's been here for many years. I'm going to stop here. There's so many different angles that we can talk about. Some of the stuff that Ash brought up that I'd love to get into about the more positive use cases of this generative AI within the business. But I'm sure we'll get into that in the questions. So I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone's asking. And back to you, Sharon.
Yeah. So thank you, Donica, for highlighting that. Ultimately, it still is the age-old question of, how technology can help protect us. But at the end of the day, we're still businesses, we're still humans. So I think back to Ash then, it's kind of taking it a little step backwards. So everybody, I think, is getting excited about how they can benefit from new AI technologies. And they're obviously using it day by day, installing new apps, new plugins. So I guess turning it back to you and the human element, what are you seeing? And kind of at the holistic level, does the use of Gen AI open up particular cybersecurity problems for your organization?
So I think I've covered off some of those problems already, which is particularly from my standpoint, the lack of visibility that I have into what people are putting into these models, right? I would say, and I would wager this is probably pervasive across most organizations. The reality is there's no cascaded culture across teams that absolutely recognize the risks or issues around leveraging some of this technology. And so to Donna's point, right, if you focus on just the sort of junior entry level analysts or whatever it might be in teams, they're not getting this kind of tone from the top or any kind of cultural messaging from their managers or the team leaders or things like this around whether on the exploit limitation for this kind of technology, then they're going to run riot with it. And that's probably where we're challenged the most at the moment, which is trying to wrap our arms around the business so that we can work with sort of local champions in operations teams to help understand the use cases for them, because we want to positively identify them, but then ensure that we're doing so in a managed way. because it was a great point. I wasn't sort of meaning to focus sort of just on the the Exco board level. This is absolutely something we see throughout. I mentioned contractors as a great example. So one of the things that we noticed at the really beginning, sort of the advent of the use of Gen AI, was that a lot of our contractors and third parties weren't being subject to the same training or development kind of programs as our full-time users were in the business, and yet we were relying quite heavily on contractors, and that's a obvious threat vector for attackers to go through. Indeed, maybe even with the contractors themselves, but certainly for mistakes to be made at a minimum. So we've seen that as one of the areas where we really need. We've been working to try and drill down and ensure that everyone that is parity in all of the training programs that we're providing, and that we deliver that through various gamified methods. As I said, though, the key thing for us as well, though, is to try and, although the approach that we've seen more beneficial is to try and work with some of those operations teams to understand, why is it that they're using it. And as I said, a lot of them are very straightforward use cases, right, where someone might be just wanting to automate the search of Excel functions, for example, whereas others are using more open source information. I think where the challenge is, which we can't sort of monitor on a day-to-day basis, or the use of at least, is that these models are designed to return answers come what may. They're not really interested in accuracy, which is a problem for us because we work in a business where data integrity in financial operations is absolutely critical. So no matter what part of that process chain it may be and what data is being inputted or outputted, one of the challenges we have to, I think, tackle is managing the expectations of users that don't be fooled into thinking that this is replicating sort of intelligence. It's one of the reasons I hate the word artificial intelligence, because there's no real replication of intelligence. It's providing very detailed answers in an intuitive manner, particularly with the advent of large language models. And I think that's where the sort of excitement can run away with users, because it does expedite things so much. I've had personal use cases where I've used it, for example, writing job descriptions. It can do 90% of the work for me, but then I know how to manage the other 10% to ensure that it's accurate and contextualized, etc. So when I think about that in the context of some of the finance operations that we're doing, we're really a sort of middleman in a lot of our financial service activity. It's just crucial that people know the exploit limitation of that technology and how far it can go, and where it can go wrong.
So actually, yeah. I think that actually segues really well into my next question, which also we have a couple of questions now from the audience. So this one, combining with an audience question, is to Donica. So Donica, you talked about AI hype. So obviously that kind of leads on from where Ash was talking, that perhaps we're expecting too much out of AI and it's not really that intelligent. So talk to me about, this is a bit of a two-part question. How much of this is hype and how much is real is the first part. And the audience question specifically is, are these malicious versions of ChatGPT readily available?
Thanks, Sharon. So yeah, I very much agree with what Ash just said, actually, which is that, I'm quite, for someone with AI in his job title, I'm quite shy of using the phrase artificial intelligence, because I think it often leads people down the wrong path, right? These are not intelligent tools. They are, to me, super automation machines, right? They leverage speed of computing and huge data volumes to do things that are genuine steps forward from what we were able to do even a couple of years ago, right? So there is a huge hype train at the moment, but I think it's totally different from something like the blockchain, right? Which is, Ash may disagree, I think still struggling to find its killer applications as a technology. I think it's really clear that these generative AI, particularly large language models, have applications that are transforming workplaces today. I think some of the most inarguable ones are in the realm of what we call co-pilots, right? So GitHub has a coding co-pilot, so many others are bringing out similar things. And it is that simple question answer, do simple stuff for me, accelerators of productivity. and they are taking off across the place. And every serious engineer that uses them is reporting significant improvements in what they can do, up to the extent that we're beginning to have to rethink what training a junior software engineer looks like, right? Because they're no longer the resource needed to do huge amounts of dog's body work creating simple code bases, because that can mostly be done with these Copilot tools now. It's actually increasing the cognitive requirements on engineering teams, right? Because the unique selling point that the humans have is the ability to creatively come up with ideas for what to do and how to plumb together different bits of technology for new and exciting ends. They're not really as necessary as they used to be even a year ago for actually just implementing the basics. Where I think the AI really does shade into the realm of hype is, and I'm sure again from the finance world, this is something Ash has probably experienced before. When someone tells you something like, the AI can spot patterns in data that would be invisible to a human, 99 times out of 100, my experience is that's not true, right? What they can do is they can explore corners of your huge data volume in an automated, tireless way that would be impossible for even a team of humans to accomplish in the same time frame, right? So again, that to me is looks much more like automation than it does like intelligence of any kind. You still have to figure out what patterns it should look for, what counts as something interesting, and what is going to come with it is the downside of lots of false positives, right? In the finance world, everyone is aware of people coming with an AI backtest of a super trading model that they've come up with that has got outlandish returns over the last 10 years, and it's because if you can look through enough different potential strategies, you're always going to find something that has fantastic performance, but there's absolutely no guarantee that it's going to work into the future. So I think, as with all of these things, the stuff that is going to actually transform our lives is the more mundane end of the spectrum, right? It's the fact that you have these productivity enhancing tools. You have now a super flexible input output framework, which is what these large language models often are, right? You don't need to have even a rudimentary coding background anymore if you can just type plain text into a prompt window and get a response back, right? You can write, people may have seen the GPT-4 launch demo where someone said they actually were previewing something that's not publicly available yet, which is an image input-output framework that it has. So the guy was able to draw an image of a website that they wanted, show it to a camera, input that into GPT-4, and it output the basic HTML code to create a web application on the basis of the sketch that he had just shown it. So that stuff taken incrementally, thousands, tens of thousands of people across the world adopting it for hundreds and hundreds of projects is going to transform businesses the way the introduction of word processing and the spreadsheet transformed businesses from the 70s to the 2000s. Just to jump onto that, the second part of the question, which is malicious use cases, are these available? The answer with all of these things is, to motivated people, they're absolutely available, right? So Joe Blogs can't sit down in their library internet terminal and go on standard Google search and necessarily download them in 30 minutes, but someone that sits at home that is comfortable with maybe browsing on Tor network or similar can get them trivially, right? So if there is someone that is motivated enough to do malicious stuff, that they would be able to get skimmed credit card numbers or access to data on company employees taken from a dark web forum, which is hundreds of thousands of people globally are that motivated and that knowledgeable, all of those people can have access to this. And again, probably all of those people, if they wanted to, could have created phishing communications in the past. So it's not as if they're getting a kind of attack vector that was completely unknown to them or impossible for them to inhabit before, but it's an enabler, right? Just like we've got our productivity tools on the good side of the ledger, they've got their productivity tools on the negative side of the ledger. And there's a saying that quantity has a quality all of its own, right? And if you can create huge volumes of something, that changes what the threat looks like. As we talked about previously, if every element of your business can be under attack pretty much continuously, that is a changed threat landscape from what it looked like previously, even if each individual attack doesn't look that different from what you were suffering before.
So thanks, Donica. I've got another question from the audience, and this one is for you, Ash. And the question is, what security challenges in identity and access management are introduced by the increase of AI generative tools, and how can the organizations effectively mitigate these?
It's a good question. So probably, again, it'll be the first few steps of a kill chain, which will be the impersonation of personas for us, particularly in any multinational business. It's very difficult to keep track of that without a centralized program for IAM, particularly with a strong core focus on governance management. So by that, I mean not only having very clean roles-based access control for all of your users and understanding who's accessing what, when, and why, but also across all of your application coverage. So in my personal experience, we've got lots of applications which are very esoteric, locally hosted, locally managed as well. And when we scale that in terms of the probability of the loss event occurring, which is someone accessing that resource who shouldn't be, leveraging whatever means, that sort of factorizes very dramatically when you're looking at a large application estate across a global technology environment. But to Donica's point, I think, and I've long said this, that it is simply automating pace and scale for the attackers, which they just didn't have beforehand. And so whereby they may have taken a long time to study and do reconnaissance on a handful of users and part of our business, how they operate, what resources they access, when they access it, from which locations, that now can be expedited dramatically. And so, yeah, so in the IAM space, that's really where I see it. And I also think, sort of on the flip side then, there is a strong opportunity for people in businesses in roles like myself, where we can help take decisions quicker and at a larger scale by using some of these technologies to counteract some of that. So eventually things like these co-pilots that Donica talked about, I think it's going to have a massive step change on decision making for anyone making decisions at whatever strata in an organization's function. To use an example there, right? If you think about Microsoft, if it was from an identity and access perspective, being able to get really specific data points and telemetry on my users and their identity and authentication mechanisms in the business and authorization protocols or whatever it might be, how many of them have got MFA, enabled and things like this. There are very few cybersecurity tools at the moment, and in fact, I actually think this is the reason why Snowflake are focusing on the security data lake so much, is because there are very few tools that give reporting how decision making is executed. And this is where I see, and what I mean by that is lots of tools will report fixed dashboards, which is great, but then decision makers have to go away and do a lot of work with that to then actually execute an activity. And that activity has a cost associated with it, and something is deprioritized or reprioritized as a result of that. And that happens, again, continuously on a daily basis, from a very, very small level through to a very, very large level when it comes to investment decisions. The ability, particularly from an identity and access management perspective, which is a program that I'm focusing on heavily at the moment, to be able to go in and make very, very short, sharp queries that I know are going to immediately influence decision making will be an absolute game changer. The operational efficiency gains for technology and security leaders will be dramatic, I think, going forward in the near future. So in that kind of quote unquote arms race, I don't think we're going to lag massively, but I do think Donica's absolutely right in the sense it will alter the focus into your sort of cognitive output. What really do we provide that's a differentiator to rote tasks? And now that those tasks are being automated, and I think this technology will exploit that continuously going forward, it will put a very sharp focus, I think, on what is it that we're doing, why are we needed. And I think the identity and access management space is probably one of the biggest hitting programs where we can gain insight from that. But it'll be the same will be true for any decision being executed in technology, I think, or even beyond.
Absolutely. And I guess back to Donica. So I know that you get really excited in the right kind of way about the potential for sophisticated cyber attacks, including advanced phishing, deepfake based impersonation, and AI generated malware. And that was really sort of like another question from a couple of the participants is, what are you seeing as the potential, and what is industry like OutThink doing to try to combat this?
So I think it's a really good point. I think it touches on the previous question about, IAM, which is that identity management is going to become more of a problem when we have the ability to quite realistically fake someone's writing style, their speech, and their even video, their look. And people might have heard recently of real, pretty scary events that happened in the US where now with a pretty small sample of someone's voice, it's quite straightforward to create a bot that can impersonate them saying anything. And so there have already been scams in the US where you might receive a phone call or a voicemail where you hear your close relative speaking to you in their own voice saying that they've been kidnapped and so wants a ransom, please send the money to this address. And so, if we imagine that impersonation happening to people in our organizations, I think there's two kinds of thing that we worry about. There's what if they impersonate us and say something public facing? And what if they impersonate us and say something internally? I think the former is not going to be as big a problem as some people think it might be. We've always had this worry about, deep fake. What if someone, fakes a video of President Biden saying something and it moves the markets and so on? And I think, to be honest, we're gonna relax back to a new normal where we understand that those things are possible, and so we check in more detail. People might have seen that when Midjourney, the very powerful generative AI image generation tool, was released, someone created an image that purported to show the Pentagon being bombed. They released it on what was then Twitter, and the US stock market did a little blip. But to be honest, it corrected after a couple of minutes when people realized that this was a fake image, and many people have tried the same thing since. And to be honest, the effect has kind of gone away. Where I think we're in more trouble is the chaos that could be caused if someone is able to successfully impersonate someone and then try and go under the radar, but say stuff internally in an organization, right? I think there's quite a lot of chaos that could cause. And I think, to be honest, the only thing that we can do is the relatively boring response of saying, we got to have a process in place, right? So it's a bit like, when your bank tells you, look, don't send any personal information, even if you receive a text from your bank. Don't ring a phone number that comes to you via text message. We will never do that. You only use the publicly available means of communication, and always ring us, never wait for us to ring you. We're going to need similar stuff internally in organizations, most of which is already there. To be honest, is it always enforced at the minute? Probably not as much as it should be, right? And I think we're going to need to enforce those kind of processes more, which says, look, even if it would be really convenient, even if someone says that they're your direct line manager, do not provide X kind of information over email or even over the phone or over whatever. Follow this process that is in place for a reason, because even very trusted people can be impersonated on a video call, on a voice message, certainly in an email or instant message communication. And I think we're just all going to have to get a lot better as organizations about putting those kind of processes in place, and as individuals at actually following them all the time, rather than just when it suits us. To try to answer the other specific question about what are we seeing about with these kind of attacks, I'll give you another example that comes back to the idea of what volume of easy generation of these communications can mean. And it's something that I call like a loitering munition type attack. So you might be aware of this thing with drones in warfare. They can sit up in the sky for hours or even days waiting for a target to appear, and then they can attack when they need to. By analogy, it's pretty cheap now for someone to create an agent that can have back and forth conversations with someone ad infinitum, right, that are pretty believable. So you could create these agents and have them communicate to different targets in an organization, and then maybe 9 out of 10 people will say, oh, I don't believe that, that's a bot, that's spam, that's whatever, and they'll ignore it. But someone will reply, and you can get a back and forth conversation, and you're not doing anything particularly malicious in the moment. You're not asking them for information, you're not doing anything. You're having a relatively standard conversation with them. And you can keep that communication going for weeks, months, even years, until you decide that now is the moment that trust has been gained sufficiently and the time is right to elicit whatever information you want from that individual. And suddenly this supposed person that they've been talking to for a long time is that they trust is asking them for something, and they'll be much more likely to send that across, right? So you no longer need to wait until the moment of attack to initiate communication with someone, because it's so cheap to have that going on for a very long time in the run up to when you actually need it as a bad actor. So I think we just have to have a certain amount of creativity on our side to imagine these threats and to be alive to them when other people are reporting them, and just adjust our strategy accordingly. But to me, to us at OutThink, it all comes back to the same thing of trying to make sure that people are, I like the word that Ash used earlier, champions, right? We're trying to build champions in our organizations that will proactively go out and not only obey these policies, but actually encourage others to do the same, to come up with new ideas for security, to constantly strengthen things all the time, because we know that the bad actors are constantly trying to upgrade their capabilities.
So thank you, Donica, and thank you, Ash, for sharing your invaluable expertise and insights today. So just got a few minutes left, but before we conclude, I would like to pose a final question to both of you. And the question is, as we look ahead to the future of AI and its role in cybersecurity, what single piece of advice would you offer to our audience, whether they're professionals in the field or simply curious learners? What is the best advice that you have today to navigate the evolving landscape of AI and cybersecurity? So I guess, Donica, will start with you, and then Ash will allow you to wrap it up for today.
Great. So I think to me, it's, don't be intimidated by what's going on, the more bleeding edge of the hype train. Everything that you see at the moment is an evolution rather than a revolution compared to what came before, right? No matter how impressive we all find these new technologies, they are more, they have more data, they're more flexible in terms of the inputs and outputs that they can handle. They are maybe faster than they were before. But in terms of the processes they're doing, it's all stuff you've seen before. So think about every aspect of your organization, your cybersecurity policies at the moment, and how the things that you have at the moment scaled up might affect them. And that's what you're going to see coming down the line from the new AI revolution. And you can evolve just as much as they are, right? So I think, for example, just to give one concrete example of what I mean, incident response, right? This is something where we hear, AI can change incident response forever, and it can be, oh, great, are all my competitors, they've got these incredibly intelligent machines that are going to tell them exactly what to do. And it's like, well, that's not actually what's happening, right? Instead, what we're saying is, well, you have a huge volume of automatically generated report logs from across your extremely complex multi-cloud platform, whatever. Previously, it's not like you had an individual human that was sitting reading them and coming up with an idea for you. You already had a semi-automated system that would ingest them, right? But you had to have an engineer that would build a pipeline that would format them in the correct way, and you maybe had a relatively rules-based system for how it would respond to them, and it took quite a lot of effort, right? And if it saw something that it hadn't met before, it wouldn't necessarily catch it. What you have now are, for example, large language models that can ingest huge volumes of log data in exactly its own native format. No reformatting required. You don't need a new bespoke pipeline. You can throw them into exactly the same pipeline you're using your large language model for in applications across the business. And it can give you an output that is much more understandable by people that have business interests at heart rather than technology interests, right? You don't need that additional layer to retranslate it again back into insight for a business person. And it has a bit more of an ability to handle stuff that's outside of its previous context than it did before, right? Still not perfect and so on. So don't be intimidated. Try to understand these things as evolutions of things you were doing previously, and make sure that people across your business are constantly thinking about the the goals of your business and your organization rather than the technology, right? Because as I mentioned, as Ash has mentioned before, as the rote tasks increasingly become automated and commodified, it's that insight into your goals and how you're going to meet them that is what's going to set you apart from the competition.
Over to you, Ash.
Yep, sorry, I was writing notes because I should have gone first. I mean, anyone who's heard me speak before will know that that's verbatim my philosophy. I mean, my view is to positively exploit the benefit of this technology. I think it's game changing for decision makers in businesses because today we're somewhat constrained by those tasks that are being executed manually. I think understanding the delineation of the technologies is important as well. You know, there's a lot of stuff underneath natural language processing that does different things. And it strikes me as odd, a lot of the sort of fear around the conversation, particularly around sort of generative AI, when actually one of the underpinning problems throughout security, at least, and I would say technology writ large, is communication. And in the large language model space, the whole excitement is because of translation. You're seeing companies, if you look at particularly some of the key AI startups globally at the moment, a lot of it is focused on communication, translating messages into different formats at a pace and scale and in forms of interpretation that we were unable to do beforehand. And I think that has powerful application for people and businesses, because it can start taking a lot of that technical complexity and putting it into language which people can understand, which can then galvanize progress in various areas. But obviously, the warning signs of be very, very clear on where that exploit limitation is, in terms of it's obviously not going to automate things like instant response, because anyone who's gone through large-scale incidents know that decisions are made in, you know, panicky crisis management meetings, and you have to go and find a particular engineer who might not even be online at that time in a part of the world that you might not be able to contact. It's all of those minutiae problems. Now, it's not going to do things like that. But absolutely, the application where I can query data in a user-friendly input-output framework is, which I couldn't do beforehand, is definitely going to be one of the game changers. And I think that my last point then is, if you think about it both either from a sort of exposure perspective or indeed a benefit perspective, the best thing you can do is run use cases, actively encourage piloting of different scenarios in the business, work with a diversity of stakeholders to do so. So champions or people in operations teams, people in HR, legal, for example, is a great one. I know when I have to go search through public documentation, if I can expedite that, brilliant, because they're just open source PDFs, and I just need to find, a single phrase. If a large language model can parse that for me and give me the output immediately, that's probably saved me half an hour of my day, which is probably relatively expensive. Well, probably not enough expensive to the business. And you start factorizing that, and you can start to see where the application will be, and then you can start crafting mitigation strategies on the types of loss events that you're going to see around those scenarios. And that's how I'd approach it. So that's my 2 pence of measly advice.
Well, and with that, we've reached the conclusion of our discussion into the dynamic world of generative AI and its impact on cybersecurity. Of course, I want to express my gratitude to our panelists, Donica and Ash, for their insights and expertise that they've shared with us today. And basically wrap it up. So, as we navigate the evolving digital landscape, of course, our shared knowledge and collaborative efforts will undoubtedly drive innovation in security forward. And thank you for the participants for attending today. We look forward to interacting with you again in the near future. And so with that, until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay secure. So thank you.
Thank you, Ash. Thank you, Sharon. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks, both.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.